Ladies and gentlemen, Ken has just got his notes, so we can proceed. He lost them this afternoon on a table in front of the Loyalist Inn, somewhere in Summerside, and when he went back to get them, they were gone. And that's his lecture notes and all his notes on the family. So he was going to wing it tonight, but he now has his notes. Someone delivered it to the front door just 2 minutes ago. Well, I want to again welcome you all to the Bedeque Area Museum's Summer Series talks. This was listed as our last talk of the season. It is no longer. We will have a talk next week, and I'll mention it later. We've added an additional talk to the series. This is the 8th talk. It's the second genealogical one on a particular family. We had the Waws a couple of weeks ago, and you always wonder how many people will turn up. You know, genealogy is so specific, but we've got a good crowd tonight. And how many have a connection with the Montgomery family in some way or other genealogically? So there's certainly, you probably haven't been to the other talks, if some of you may have been, but they've been on a variety of topics. If I didn't, I said at the beginning who I am. I'm Doug Sobey, president of the Bedeque Area Historical Society, and it gives me great pleasure to have tonight Ken Montgomery from Medicine Hat, Alberta. Now, I've not met Ken before this week, but I've known him for some time on account of his support for the museum. He is an ardent supporter, buying raffle tickets. So far unsuccessful. You could use those lobster rolls today. That's what Ken had just had a lobster roll, and it was the excitement of the lobster roll that made him leave his notes, I guess. Ken, we're pleased to welcome you. You haven't. I will leave it to you to tell your background as much as you want to the audience, and. We look forward to hearing your topic on the Montgomery family. So, Ken Montgomery.
Yeah, it wasn't so much the excitement of having a lobster roll. I think it was the bill I looked at. I thought my lovely friend Kathy Montgomery here was taking me to Subway. Not even close. Anyway, it's nice to see the good turnout of Montgomerys. If we were Campbells, we'd have a lot here or enough here to go on a good sheep raid. But of course Montgomerys don't do that. What I'll do is I'm going to kind of leave my introduction to the end. I'm going to kind of do this a little weird because it pairs into what I'm doing. But take it, even though I'm from away, I'm very, very proud of my PEI blood, and especially its connection to Bedeque, as was my father, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, Tenny Montgomery, who left here in 1898 to come out and make a new life at a little place called Siding 16, which became Wetaskiwin, Alberta. Anyway, it's likely, so do we have any Murrays, MacFarlanes, or Hoopers here? Anybody with that kind of blood?
Hooper.
Hooper? Okay, so we tie in the MacFarlanes, the Hoopers, and the Murrays. And of course, any man who's gutsy or ballsy enough to admit it will have to say he wouldn't be where he was if it wasn't for his wife. So of course the Montgomery women are very strong and everything else, and if you look at our Montgomery clan crest, it depicts a lady holding an anchor in one hand and a head in the other hand. So one line is "Don't mess with Montgomery women." But the story on that was the Mary Montgomery at Seaside Castle was very beautiful, apparently, and a Danish prince popped by and he was enamored with her and he wanted her, and she said no. So he picked her up and kidnapped her and took her on his boat, and they were getting drunk going back to Denmark, and while they were all passed out sleeping, it's alleged she chopped off his head, held it up and said, "Take me back to Scotland." So that's where the head comes from. So again, don't mess with Montgomery women, but again, Montgomery women might not necessarily be Montgomerys, they could be Hoopers, MacFarlanes, or Murrays. So it's also interesting that this year's the 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, as this event resulted in the creation of the United Empire Loyalists, many of whom would be greatly influenced the early population and history of the island. The Loyalists will also be a very, very important part of my Montgomery heritage, or Bedeque Montgomery heritage. So I've been spending many, many years researching my family history, and there's still much to be learned and information to be verified. This includes dates of birth, marriage, deaths, and other information that comes up. So what I present now is information that I believe to be accurate, but I always stand to be corrected, because I've found many, many times something that somebody believed for many, many years wasn't right. And I recall an article in the paper where this fellow spent over 40 years researching his family history, and he just about completed it. And he had reams of material, and he had charts and everything else. And the last bit of information he found out was he was adopted. You never know where it's going to lead. Okay, so before going farther, I believe we need to start looking at the first, and everybody can hear me okay? Yeah. Yes. Okay, good. We have to look at the first Montgomerys to settle on the island, as they're progenitors of most or all of the PEI Montgomerys. And I note there are various versions on how the Montgomerys arrived. The Malpeque, An Island History, the Island Register, Lucy Maud Montgomery herself in one of her books refers to the Murrays fictionally, but she alleges that their arrival to the island was the same as her parents, her grandparents, her great-grandparents. None of it's true. None of it's right. And some people get really mad at me when I tell them, sorry, we've been telling this for generations, and it's just not right. So let's set the record straight. The first Montgomerys who arrived here were Hugh and Mary Montgomery, and their children Donald, Margaret, John, Helen, and Hugh. They came from a wee farm at Leapenstraw, Scotland, which is located in Kintyre, Argyllshire, Scotland, which is near the Mull of Kintyre. Remember the Paul McCartney song, Mull of Kintyre? Which a lot of Montgomerys play at their funeral, because that's really sending them back home to Kintyre. So if anybody's got a list that they want for their funeral, that's what they're going to do. And the family did not arrive together. The big official version is that the boat was coming over, was headed for Quebec, and that Mary Montgomery stopped at the North Shore near Malpeque at Fox Point, which is correct, and said, "I'm going no farther. And so here I stay," and they stayed. Not correct. What happened, from everything we've got documented nowadays, is Hugh and his oldest son Donald came over ahead on the Annabella. And there's about 100 to 200 passengers on that boat, including McGugan's, MacArthur's, Sinclair's, Murphy, and McKay families. And that boat washed ashore and wrecked on the shore of Malpeque. And they were cast ashore. The rest of the family came a year later on the ship, the Edinburgh. And we know that because 2005, we found ship registers that showed Hugh Montgomery paid for the passage of his wife and kids, plus a Neil Montgomery, who we don't know who he is. He could have been a brother or cousin, and a Neil McShannon, which could be a brother or something heard, but it wouldn't be uncommon for them to come over to help get the family over, because the youngest son, he was only born like a year or so before, so he was pretty little. So that's complete information. Also, if you're ever up at Malpeque and see the gravestone of Helen Montgomery, it shows that her husband died in 1770, or he was on 1770 on the Annabella, and she followed. And it says it right on the tombstone, followed in 1771. So clearly, he's on the Annabella, she's on another ship. Okay. Also, you may have heard of a fellow called Thomas Curtis. I'm sure Doug does. Preserved writings of Thomas Curtis about the early days of PEI are well known. And the most important evidence that exists to support that Hugh arrived in the Annabella comes from Curtis himself. Curtis noted in his diary the obvious hardships the Montgomerys were enduring after recalling a visit he had at their home at Princetown at Fox Point and wrote, "This man treated us very kindly and seemed to have a feeling of my situation, as he was once cast away and suffered much." So there he's admitting it's the same kind of thing. The next is important to note that where the Montgomerys who arrived in the island were not original United Empire Loyalists, they, like many other islanders, would marry into UEL families. And it's quite common, and probably a lot of you here aren't aware that you have UEL bloodage. And if you look at the official listings, correct me, the official listings for titles, like if you're a doctor, you can put MD after your name, that kind of stuff. If you go on the website for that, UE is the only case where you're a descendant of United Empire Loyalists, you can legally put that after your name. Nobody can go after you on that. A lot of people don't know that. Okay. So the first Montgomery home was a log cabin built at Fox Point near Malpeque. Of interest, Brett Montgomery, who's sitting at the back, he's a Park Corner Montgomery, he's with me tonight. And I drove up to Fox Point on Saturday to take a look at and just as we pulled up, we saw there's 3-4 cars parked out front with US plates on it. And it turns out these are the current owners that descend from Judge Nadio, who bought the property in 1958. They were just leaving to go back to Hoboken, New Jersey. So they've been coming up here for all those years and they're Americans. And the amount of work and money that they put into this house is just amazing. Also, Doug can attest, saving it from falling into the sea, because with the shore receding, when I was out in 95, they had like a city block, or half a city block in front of it. And I saw a picture from 1930, and they had like 6 city blocks in front of it. They moved it a few years back at huge cost, and right now they've probably got 30, 40 feet. And now he's got no land behind him, so probably expect in the next 30 years that house will be gone unless it's moved again somewhere else other than Fox Point. So, the oldest son, Donald, married Nancy Penman. She was the daughter of George Penman, a Loyalist from Richmond Bay, is formerly a paymaster in the British Army. They would have 17 children. If you saw the size of this house, the original house, because we were on the basement, you can see with the beams and stuff, we're talking like a little bigger than a 1-car garage, because they hadn't added a second story. So how they did it, who knows? And that includes one of the children was Donald Jr., who will be known as Big Donald Montgomery. Of course, mention must be made of Big Donald. He was a farmer and politician who represented Princetown and then the first Queens in the Legislative Assembly, PI, from 1838 to 1874. He also served as a Conservative member of the Senate of Canada from 1873 until his death in 1893. Big Donald would marry Anne Murray, the daughter of Loyalist David Murray and Elizabeth Betsy Penman, and they're the ones who lived at Park Corner, and they're the ones who are the grandparents of Lucy Montgomery. Margaret would marry Captain McLeod, who drowned, then Thomas, and Archibald was a shipbuilder, and he's the progenitor of the Port Hill Montgomerys. Do we have any Port Hill Montgomerys here? No? I don't know if there's a whole ton of them, but they're out there.
My mother's relatives, yeah.
Okay. The second son, John, would be the progenitor of the Bedeque Montgomerys. Helen, also known as Nellie, married Archibald Ramsey at Beach Point, and Hugh, the youngest child, married Christy Penman, who was the sister of his brother Donald's wife, Nancy. And it was these two who established the Port Hill Montgomerys. So before moving on to John, we have to talk about Thomas Hooper of Bedeque. As without Thomas Hooper, there may be no Montgomerys of Bedeque at all. According to old records, prior to coming to the island, Thomas Hooper lived near Windsor in Middlesex County, New Jersey. At the end of the Revolutionary War, he was subjected to considerable harassment. Patriot soldiers ransacked his home, smashed his furniture, and took his livestock. After conversing with his friend Richard Robbins, the two decided to travel to Nova Scotia, where they heard free land was allotted to subjects loyal to the crown. Leaving his family behind, Thomas and Richard arrived in Nova Scotia in the spring and carefully examined different places to settle. They also looked at locations in St. John's Island. Now, Thomas returned home to New Jersey to fetch his family and learned that Patriot soldiers had come looking for him. Not finding him, they took their revenge by ransacking his house. They also found his wife in bed recovering from the birth of his last child, another son. and it's reported they assaulted him, so subjected her to cruel indignities. She was then taken to an old building where she died. Thomas was becoming an embittered man with contempt of anything related to the United States. He prepared to sell his possessions in New Jersey and leaving his girls Sarah and Ann to care for Elisha, his son. He and his sons Major and Tommy returned to the island to prepare a new home. Thomas petitioned the island governor Walter Patterson for land. It was granted to refugees, and a month later he heard the governor had granted him, Richard Roberts, and William Sherman, you probably heard that name, land in Township Number 1 containing 1,250 acres. Thomas selected his land in Bedeque Bay and acquired 250 acres fronting on Bedeque Bay and 250 acres further inland. However, with no shelter for the winter, his family stayed at Shelburne, Nova Scotia until the spring of 1785 when they returned. 1786, Thomas was appointed one of the justices of the peace for the island. Richard Robbins would be his neighbor. His daughter Anne, who was born about 1770 in New Jersey, would marry John Montgomery. This is going now into the Bedeque line. John Montgomery was born about 1766 at Leap and Straw in Scotland, and he was the second son. Remember, in those days, the oldest son pretty well got everything. Second son, third son, they had to fend for themselves. Once married, John and Ann didn't stay at Fox Point but moved to Bedeque and set up a home on a farm near Ann's father, which was on the road to Tryon. Am I saying that right? Tryon or Tryon? Tryon, okay. This land was no doubt provided by Thomas. They had 9 children. Anne Donald, also called Daniel, Thomas Hugh, Mary John, who died young, Major Sarah and Archibald. In doing the research, there's an interesting sideline that on the name Donald, the same person can be called Daniel. So sometimes you're going through the records, they'll say Daniel, sometimes they say Donald. They figure what it is Daniel was considered English and thought by some of the day to be more proper than the Scottish Donald. St. Xylan became a PEI in 1799. Thomas Hooper died in 1816 at the age of 50. His wife Anne died in 1835 at the age of 65. Their house is probably located just beyond this site, and both are buried in the Methodist Cemetery at Lower Bedeque, which I think the Methodist Cemetery switched to United Church. It's all one and the same, right? With respect to their children, their daughter Anne married John Townsend, and they had 4 children, Mary, Helen, Anne, Montgomery Townsend, all of whom reigned at Bedeque. Anne Montgomery Townsend died 11 April 1870 at the age of 75, and John died at the age of 90. Donald married Sarah Cole, who was the daughter of Benjamin and Isabel Robbins Cole, and they settled at Travelers Rest and had a family of 2 sons and 4 daughters. He died in 1850, she died in 1872. Thomas moved to Restigouche, Quebec, and is reported to have married an Isabella Adams. Hugh married Elizabeth Murray, and they settled at a farm next to his father. Mary married James Wright, the 5th son of Loyalist Nathaniel Wright and Anne Lord. James was the grandson of William Wright, another Loyalist, and they were the progenitor of the Bedeque Wrights. You know any Wrights from Bedeque. John, as mentioned previous, died young. Major moved to Bachelor, New Brunswick, where it's believed he married. It's reported Sarah never married, remained in Bedeque, and died 4th August 1872, and Archibald would marry Mary Knight. Anne Hooper Montgomery died 7th of March 1835, age 65. John was followed 1845, and they're both buried at Presbyterian Cemetery here at Bedeque. Now we get into Hugh and Elizabeth Murray Montgomery. Hugh was born 11th of May 1803 at Bedeque. Like his father and grandfather, he was also a farmer. The license dated 29th of July 1833 was issued so he and Elizabeth Murray could marry. Elizabeth was born 1809 and was the daughter of Loyalist David Murray and Elizabeth Betsy Penman Murray of North Bedeque. Of interest, Hugh's wife Elizabeth was the twin sister of Anne Murray, who married Hugh's cousin Big Donald. This gets confusing. Also, their brother Benjamin Murray married Jane Montgomery, Big Donald's sister. You get a lot of trying to family tree doesn't have one branch, contrary to public belief. Hugh's youngest brother Archibald married Mary Knight of Halifax. They remained in Bedeque and lived on a farm next to Hugh. Hugh and Elizabeth Murray Montgomery had 6 children: Anne, David, James, Thomas, Townsend. Elizabeth was called Eliza. Anne Montgomery married William Brown, and they were the parents of Grace Brown, who married Norman Montgomery. James' cousin, also the son of Archibald and Mary Knight Montgomery. David didn't want a farm and he moved to Summerside, where he became a commission merchant, taking possession of goods to manage, transport, and sell. In 1869, David would be appointed clerk of the small debt court. Later, he was chairman of the municipality of Summerside, that position being like a provost or mayor, in 1880, 1883, and 1885. David married Annie McEwen. They had 6 children. Louis Davies, called Deacon. I've got his shaving mug. It says Deacon on it. Sarah, William A., Elizabeth, Annie, and Emma. James Montgomery married Catherine MacFarlane of Fernwood. Thomas never married, lived on a farm just east and next to his father's farm. Townsend, also single, and his sister Elizabeth, who never married, was remembered for keeping house for him. 1st of July 1873, PEI joined Confederation and became a Canadian province. So Hugh died 23 February 1877, and in his will, he left to his son James 102 acres of land in which he then lived, and to his son Thomas another 102 acres next to him that was known as the Gardner Farm, and to his son Townsend 25 acres of land, partly arable and partly marsh. Hugh's brother Archibald and his wife Mary had a farm just west of Hugh, and they had 5 children, including Norman Ramsey Montgomery, who was mentioned previous, married Hugh's niece Grace Brown. They remained at Bedeque. Next, there was John Thomas, who drowned at 17 on a sailing ship. Alexander moved to and died in Colorado. Knight, who also moved to and died in Colorado. And Georgina, an invalid who never married. Archibald died in 1891, Mary died in 1897. Both are buried in the North Bedeque Cemetery. Their son Norman would take over their family farm. Summerside would become a town in 1898. Norman and Grace Montgomery had 5 children. William, called Will, who married Murtis Marshall Pickett's. Archibald, who married Mildred Craig. Mary Savannah Annie, and John, who died in 1928. Murtis Pickett's was the daughter of John Rhodes Pickett's and Margaret Jane Cairns of Wilmot Valley. She and William farmed at Lower Bedeque, and they had 2 sons, John Norman, called Norman, and George Frizzell Montgomery, called George. Both sons would take over the Montgomery farm. Norman never married, and George married Kathy Smith, who's with us today. And they had 6 children, William, George, Donald Garth, called Donnie, Gladys Ferguson, called Jane, Kathleen Ann, called Ann, John Norman, Clifford Paul, called Paul. When Norman died in 2008, that Montgomery home at Bedeque was sold, and I understand it was later bought by Donnie and then resold to a fella I just met today. Are you here? Oh, he's not here. John Procopio, originally from Bachar. He's at the back. Hi, John. John and his wife sit at the back. They're now the current owners and done a heck of a lot of work on that house, and it's looking good. It's looking different, but it's looking good. And Kathy, okay, George died at the Prince County Hospital, Summerside, 2015, at the age of 78. And then, of course, Kathy resides in Summerside. And she likes a good lobster roll.
I got a treat today.
Archibald and Mildred. Oh, actually, before I carry on, the Montgomery tart is also something very interesting and unique, especially with Scottish. You go to a lot of Scottish functions, you see a lot of reds and greens and maybe a few yellows, but you don't see the majestic Montgomery purple. And that's a Montgomery dress tart, and that dress that was made by Kathy some time ago. Coat. It's not for auction.
I have a dress for magic
There you go.
made.
In 1934, Sylvania married Ernest Sedgwick Wright, called Ike, who was the son of Leslie Wright of Summerside. Sylvania and Ike had 1 child, Marion Wright, born in 1939. Marion would marry Cyril Jackman, and they had 5 children, Diane, Michael, Robert, Paul, and David. Elizabeth Marie died in 1864, and she was followed by Hugh, who died 23 February 1877. Both are buried in the cemetery here at Bedeque. James and Catherine Montgomery. James was the oldest son of Hugh Montgomery and Elizabeth Marie, and like his father, was also a farmer. On 21 May 1875, he and Catherine William MacFarlane of Fernwood were married by Reverend R.S. Patterson at Bedeque. Catherine was born 22 May 1841, was a granddaughter of Donald MacFarlane, another Loyalist who served with the British Army during the American Revolution. Her parents were Malcolm and Barbara Orr MacFarlane of Fernwood. They had 10 children, including Margaret, Catherine, William Moore, James Barclay, Andrew Alexander, and it goes on. And the last one, Alice Percival, who married Dr. John Sutherland of Summerside. Of note, Catherine's brothers William Moore, James Barclay, and Andrew all moved to Colorado with their cousins Alexander and Knight Montgomery. There must have been some kind of draw. There's a big famous opera house down in Colorado that's still there, and that was built by the MacFarlanes. So. Catherine's sisters, Mary Jane and Harry and Ann MacFarlane, would marry brothers John and George Washington West. These two guys on my side of the family become very important. James and Catherine had 4 children, Hugh John, Alice Barbara, Mary Maud Mahala, called Haley, and William Frank Hale. Haley was a teacher at the Lower Bedeque School, and her name's on the wall from, I guess, 1898 to in there, 1899. Hugh John was given the nickname Tenny, because he was born during the 100th anniversary of the American Revolution. So it's interesting when they talk about the American Revolution, it's the 250th anniversary. How many guys on the island were named, if their first name was George, they called him George Washington West, or George Washington this. And Tenny, because the American Revolution, called him Tenny to acknowledge the 100th anniversary of the American Revolution. So there's obviously a tie of some sorts to the United States. Tenny grew up on the family farm, attended public school at Lower Bedeque, and later the Charlottetown Business College. He would have been 8 years old when in 1884 the first telephone was installed at PEI. While a teenager and later as a young man, and this is a fellow who lived at your house, James' son. While a teenager and later as a young man, he, like other young men and women on the island, would be excited reading stories about Canada's Northwest and the fortune-seeking possibility of what was then referred to as the Klondike Gold Rush. The lure of making one's fortune out west was not just appealing to young people such as Tenny and his cousins. In 1891, Tenny's uncle and Aunt George and Harriet West moved west to Poplar Grove in Northwest Territories. A stagecoach runs between Edmonton and Calgary on an old native trail called Wolf Trail, an important stopping place for the Calgary and Edmonton Railway called the C&E Railway. Here George became the town's first entrepreneur, opening a general store there to service the locals. And more importantly, the railway passengers traveling back and forth between Edmonton and Calgary. That place would later be called Innisfail, Alberta. In 1892, Tenny's other uncle and aunt, John and Mary Jane West, followed by moving to Siding 16, Northwest Territories. Another railway stop was about 124 kilometers away from Innisfail. In the old days on the railway, because they were run by steam and they needed water, they put water towers every so many miles. So it'd be Siding 1, there was a water tower, so many miles down Siding 2, and so on. Siding 16, upon the recommendation of Father Lacombe, was later renamed Wetaskiwin, and of course became Wetaskiwin, Alberta in 1905. In 1893, John West bought a prime location on the corner of Pearson Railway Streets just across from the railway station, erected a large store. Business in Wetaskiwin was booming, and a lot of islanders followed. But they weren't dummies like a lot of the other people. A lot of these guys were going to make their fortune in the gold rush. So they had to go out and buy all the supplies, like a pickaxe and blankets and all that stuff. So the Montgomerys were smart. They sold them the supplies, but they weren't going to go dig in the fields. Many others moved west to territories, including the Vaughan family from Roscoe, Illinois, who in 1894 settled at Todd's Crossing, a place near Wetaskiwin. More on them in a bit. Where Tenny had worked the home farm and attended school, he then entered commercial circles, becoming a clerk for W.S. Newsom in Centerville, Bedeque. He then moved to Summerside, where he stayed with his Uncle David, became a bookkeeper at the Holman store. It's likely that when he was here, David was inspired Tenny to have an interest in politics, because he's the guy who's the mayor and all that of Summerside. In her diary, late in 1897, Maud, now a teacher, moved to Lower Bedeque and began to act as a substitute teacher at the Lower Bedeque School across the road now. One of her students was Frank Montgomery. In her diary, an entry dated 22 January 1899, Lower Bedeque reads, "When I last wrote, I was home, dreaming, analyzing, brooding unwholesomely. Then I came to Bedeque and at once found myself whirled into a life the very antipodes of that which I've been living. The reaction was needed and proved wholesome, and yet were the life I am living at present carried on too long, the effect I feel sure would be even more disastrous than that of the former. While Bedeque Maud would board at the farm of Cornelius Laird. The Lairds come to Lower Bedeque from Tyrone, PI in 1863. I'm not getting it. Tryon. I'll get it yet. Cornelius' wife Amy Jean had 8 children. The Lairds were also related to the MacFarlanes, as Neil Howard MacFarlane married Helen H. Laird, William J. Leslie MacFarlane married May Laird, and Edward Alexander MacFarlane married Frederica Laird. In 1897, their son Alphaeus Laird began the school year as a teacher at the local community school. And in the fall of 1897, he left the school to pursue medical training. And Maud came aboard the Laird house as their substitute teacher at that time. Maud was trying to end the relationship she had with Ed Simpson, where she met Herman Laird, the Laird's oldest son. In an entry in her diary dated Friday, 8th April 1898, Maud wrote, "Up to the time of my going to Bedeque, I had never loved. I had never known what it was to love intensely, passionately, and completely." And this is the one, John, I was telling you about that ties into the house you're in now. Maud also detailed private meetings with Herman in her diary, one being of note. The Union night, Herman went a step further. I was just below James Montgomery's. I recollect the moonlight gleaming on his white house, for every trifling thing seems to stamp indelibly on my memory. Herman suddenly bent his head and his lips touched my face. I cannot tell what possessed me. I seemed swayed by the power utterly beyond my control. I turned my head, our lips met in one long passionate pressure. A kiss of fire and rapture such as I had never in my life experienced or imagined. Ed's kisses at the best left me cold as ice. Herman sent flame through every vein and fiber of my being. So that happened outside your house. You're lucky nowadays. You're lucky that's all that happened. We may wonder if James Montgomery and the family were looking out the window that night or saw or heard what was going on. In the spring of 1898, or about the same time Maud and Herman were romancing, Tenny decided he was going to work. When I say Tenny, I'm referring to Hugh John. Was going to work for his uncle John West at side age 16. So at the age of 22, Tenny made his way to the mainland and began a train ride to the west in a new life. Frank would remain on the family farm with his sister Haley and their parents. And in time, Frank would take over the family farm and become another interest, one becoming fox farming. Opened 1911 a big fox farm at Fernwood. And more on that in a second. It appears Tenny liked his new home. We suspect that John West, his family, put Tenny up or otherwise got him lodgings. In any event, it wasn't long before Hugh John became active in the community, including that of playing in the Wetaskiwin band, playing with instruments such as the French horn, and playing hockey. The 1901 census of PI lists James Montgomery as being 60, Catherine is 58, and their daughter Haley is 18, and a school teacher. Frank is listed as being 23 and was described as being a farm son. And again, of interest, Haley taught school at Bedeque, and that was from 1899 to 1902. The 29 March 1901 edition of the Wetaskiwin Times reported that former Islander Clifton Edson C.E. Compton, general merchant, was taking H.J. Montgomery in a partnership. Besides Compton, other Islanders would come to Wetaskiwin. These included H.G. Murphy, William Lyle, Hal Bairstow, Austin Bairstow, sons of Dr. P. McNutt Bairstow, M.D. of Summerside, Charles Enman, Charles McMurdo, W.J. Logie, and William Mellett and his family. And I believe the Bairstows McNutt families were also early settlers to the island. Hugh John no doubt also influenced or inspired his sister Haley and his cousins Will Deacon and Sarah Montgomery McKay to also move to Wetaskiwin. In 1901, the census for Northwest Territories gave Wetaskiwin a population of 553. The 28th of June 1901 edition of the Washington Times confirmed that W.G. Will Montgomery had just arrived from PEI to accept the position with the Compton and Montgomery store. Will was the son of David Montgomery, the mayor of Summerside, or one-time mayor, Tenny's cousin. In August 1901, Will erected a handsome residence on a site located on Long Street, but not long after he sold it at auction. It appears his father was ill back in Summerside, and he decided to return to look after family affairs. His father actually died 15th of December 1901, only 63 years of age. With David's children, it's reported that Will may have married and died in 1924. Deacon never married. Like I say, I've got a shaving mug. And he remained at Wetaskiwin, where he ended up as the fire chief. His sister Sarah, who married dentist Dr. Wilson McKay back where she still lived in the island, had a dental practice in Wetaskiwin. They would move to Vancouver and had one daughter. In 1902, Wetaskiwin's first town council, Mayor Dixon and councillors then included H.J. Montgomery. They lost no time bringing a civilized atmosphere to the activity, making the first motion to propose being introducing a bylaw to prevent fast driving, racing, breaking horses, etc. on the streets. The same year, the Vaughns, going back to the Vaughns now, decided to go back to the United States and move to Minneapolis. Tenny and Adelaide apparently had some kind of relationship going on. There's no doubt the two were forming a plan. History would show they'd have to wait less than a year to put that plan into action. Hugh John then left Compton and in conjunction with his cousins Sackville and Gerard West, sons of the late John West, purchased a Star Trading Company, and that business was then named Montgomery and West. Wetaskiwin Times reported that Hugh John attended a festive event held at the Angus Hall on Friday, 19th of December 1903, and soon after he left Wetaskiwin on the train. His destination was Minneapolis. A marriage certificate issued by the County of Hennepin confirms Hugh John married Mary Adelaide Vaughn 30th of December 1903. In February 1904, Wetaskiwin Times reported Hugh John and Adelaide had just returned from the island, where Hugh John had formally introduced his new wife to his family. And they must have taught her a couple of recipes, because I recall my father telling me when he was little, going to having dinner with Hugh John and his grandmother at Christmas. And we'd have the Christmas turkey, but they always had two bowls of dressing. One was a standard dressing, the other was oyster dressing. So somebody taught her to make oyster, because they don't do that out in Alberta. That's an island thing, apparently. And I tried it. I don't know. Must be an acquired taste. In the spring of 1904, Maud took on the challenge of writing a book. And it was from there that she got into Anne of Green Gables. She tried, it failed, tried, failed, and then it became a success. 1882, Northwest Territories were divided into 4 districts: Assiniboia, Athabasca, Saskatchewan, Alberta. In 1905, Saskatchewan, Alberta became provinces. 1905, when Edmonton, or on April 25th, 1905, when Edmonton was officially made the capital of Alberta, the festivities were held in Edmonton, and Hugh and Adelaide, they took the train in from Wetaskiwin to attend. I've still got Hugh John's camera, little Polaroid camera, and a little leather photo album. It's got pictures of the Royal Northwest Mounted Police doing a charge across the field, and Wilfrid Laurier doing his speech. So they were actually there that day that Alberta became a province. Sir Wilfrid's speech was most interesting, especially when he said, "We do not anticipate, we do not want that any individual should forget the land of their origin or their ancestors. Let them look to the past, but let them also look to the future. Let them look to the land of their ancestors, but let them look also to the land of their children." I think that's so applicable no matter where you live. On 13th of March 1906, Tenny's mother, Catherine, died here in Bedeque. She's buried in the North Bedeque Cemetery. 5th of January 1907, Hugh and John had a son. They would name him Kenneth Gordon Montgomery. It's my namesake. That's my grandfather. 4th of August 1909, Frank Montgomery and Mary Pope Carr were married by the Reverend L.W. Carr, Reverend William Mason at the Carr family farm at St. Eleanor's. Mary Pope Carr was the daughter of George Washington Carr, there we go again, and Sarah Hope Compton. She was born 20th of June 1885 at Carr's Corner Farm. And like Lucy Maud Montgomery, she was a school teacher at Bedeque. Mary Pope Carr was also P.I. Montgomery prior to her marriage to Frank. Her great-grandparents being Archibald Ramsey and Helen Montgomery, the daughter of Hugh Montgomery and Mary McShannon. In 1908, James Montgomery retired, and Frank took over the family farm. Frank would also buy the farm his Uncle Thomas inherited. Thomas never married, and it's believed the purchase occurred sometime before 1917, when Thomas died. On 16th of December 1909, Hugh John and Adelaide had a second son, Lawrence Vaughan Montgomery. 1910, the same year as George V became King of England, Hugh John was elected Wetaskiwin's 5th mayor. Fur farming had originated on PI about 1896 with Charles Dalton. Later, Sir Charles, a farmer on the island, succeeded in raising a litter of silver foxes from parents captured in the wild. Like many islanders of the day, Frank Montgomery established the Silver Fox Ranch, and that would have been done about 1911 and was located just off the Sandy Hill Road to Fernwood. Frank managed his fox ranch with his cousin Frank MacFarlane. And Hugh John would be involved to set up another ranch that was established the same year just outside Wetaskiwin. It's also reported that in 1911, Frank purchased 2 fox breeders for $15,000, a huge sum in those days. Share certificates were issued in 1914 confirming Frank being the president of the Bedeque Fur Farming Company and Frank MacFarlane being the secretary. And I brought Bedeque Fur Farming Company share certificate, which I'll be leaving with Doug for the museum here. It's reported in 1911, or the beginning. Yeah, we don't know exactly when, but Haley also decided to move to Wetaskiwin. It was after 1906, but had to be somewhere around 1913 as she got married to a fellow in Calgary. There was a railway guy coming through town. I think that's how they met. 1913, Hugh John was elected to Wetaskiwin as Liberal member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta. And 1916, Frank bought out the interest in the West store. It appears he's becoming more involved with the Western interest. So he's still on the island, he's doing the fox ranch out here, he's doing the farm out here, but he's buying into businesses in Wetaskiwin. So it looks like he had something on his mind about a plan for the future. And it looks like he's doing it in conjunction with Hugh John, his brother. Both Sackville and Gerard West enlisted during World War I. Sackville signed up with 72nd Seaforth Highlanders in Vancouver, and Gerard enlisted with the 46th Battalion at Winnipeg. Sackville was killed 30th of March 1918 during a major German offensive known as Operation Michael. Gerard, wounded twice, survived, returned to Canada where he lived and died in Vancouver at the age of 70. So that ended the West involvement with Wetaskiwin. In 1921, the family farm in Bedeque, Frank sold the family farm in Bedeque to his cousin, William Will Montgomery, Will being the son of Norman and Grace Montgomery. At the end of 1921, Frank, his family, and their father James then packed up and moved to Wetaskiwin. Before leaving, and this was interesting, Doug was giving me a bit of a tour downstairs, and you'll notice on the one wall there's a walking cane with a nice gold handle. And I've seen one very, very similar to that. But before leaving, James was presented with a most wonderful walking stick with an ornate gold handle that was inscribed and stated, "To James Montgomery from your friends at Bedeque, presented November 1921. Frank and Mary Popcar had 3 children while living on the island. Catherine MacFarlane Montgomery, James William Jim Montgomery, and Marjorie Hope. After coming to, I think I missed one here, Mary Popcar. I'll have to check that. And then another child, Oliver, died in 1922, and Dorothy Francis. Until James, Frank, his family moved to Wetaskiwin, Hugh John would stay with Frank MacFarlane when visiting the island, something he would do off and on all his life. On some visits, Hugh John would sleep in what was called the French house. That being an outbuilding used for hired hands, and so named because most of them were French Canadians. After the departure, he then stayed with his cousin Harrison MacFarlane at Fernwood. In 1921, there'd be another provincial in Alberta, another election, and the Liberals would have been in power since Alberta became a province in 1925, were defeated. Hugh John then lost his seat. Back at PI in May 1922, many of you probably don't remember this one, the island legislature finally gave in and allowed women the right to vote. Quebec would be the last province to hold out. In the same year, Hugh John ran again as Wetaskiwin's mayor and was re-elected. James Montgomery's retirement would not last long. On Thursday, 22 June 1922, he passed away at age 82. So he only got to Wetaskiwin for like a year, and then he died. So they had a service in Wetaskiwin, and then they brought his body back home. We had another service at the house where you guys live, and then he was buried with his wife at the cemetery here. Of note, when it was apparent James was dying, his grandson Bob told me he sent word to his family he wanted to see his grandson James. Bob's father was only 10 at the time. He was called out of school to do so. When they met, it was that time that the senior James then presented his namesake with his gold-handled walking stick, which still remains in the family. The family suffered another more expected death less than 3 months later when Hugh John and Adelaide's youngest son Lawrence became ill. He'd been sick before, but this newest sickness was different. In those days, nothing could be done. 5th of September 1922, Lawrence Vaughan Montgomery, 13 years old, died. His death greatly affected the family and others. Lawrence would be the first member of the family to be buried at the new family plot at Wetaskiwin. His brother Ken was only 15 at the time. There's no doubt this death affected him deeply. So moving on now to my grandfather, Kenneth Gordon Montgomery of Edmonton. As a youth, Ken was very active in sports. He loved tennis and hockey. And in 1923, played hockey with the Central Alberta Champions. Athletic-related endeavors become his lifelong interest. In 1923, he received his high school diploma. In 1924, moved to Edmonton to pursue a post-secondary education. We attended McTavish Business College. At this time, Edmonton had a population of 65,000 people. Ken liked the big city and decided to stay. Ken was also an accomplished piano player, being taught by his mother. He loved to play ragtime and jazz. And don't forget, he's living in that era known as the Roaring Twenties. While studying at the business college, Ken met Muriel Evelyn Wright, who was there taking secretarial courses. Muriel, who preferred to be called Evelyn, was the daughter of Basil Heber Wright and Katie Eleanor Cowan Esdale, formerly of Ottawa. Basil worked for the federal government. In 1910, was appointed chief clerk of the Dominion Land Commissioner's office. He and his wife had 7 children. Evelyn would always be proud to be a Wright and point out she descended from Loyalist Ebenezer Newcomb Wright Jr., originally from Mansfield, Connecticut. Her father's career caused him to travel. He and the family moved to Ottawa, to Winnipeg for a time, and then Edmonton, where they arrived there about 1920. The courtship between Ken and Evelyn wasn't long. On Friday, 3rd of September, 1926, promptly at 8 o'clock, these two unaccompanied were married in Ken's parents' home in Wetaskiwin. 1925, Ken started his first official job as a secretary, as a general manager of an insurance company. He stayed there a year before moving on to a gravel company. Same year, Hugh John was re-elected as mayor by acclamation for his 5th consecutive term. In 1927, Evelyn was working for a stenographer, where Hugh John was a staunch liberal. Ken and Evelyn were as well. At the time when Evelyn would herself be involved in politics. When Canadians in Wetaskiwin celebrated Canada's Diamond Jubilee, 4th of July 1927, it was decided to mark the event by erecting a rock cairn. At the time, school children were each given a large rock to bring down to help build this cairn. Hugh John would preside over the festivities. His wife was chairman of the pageant. His brother Frank served in the parade committee. At that time, Wetaskiwin Times reported that Chief Ermineskin of the Crees, Chief Sampson, Chief Sampson of the Sampson Band, Chief Rabbit of the Montana Band, and Chief Bull, acting for Chief Simon Bull, were also present. Many speeches were given, and Chief Sampson then presented Hugh John with a headdress and a bundle of arrows, saying he gave no bow as he wanted to avert the possibility of him becoming a destructive force. Chief Rabbit then presented with a pair of buckskin chaps, really nice white background, beadwork with the Alberta roses, which I still have. At this time, Hugh John was also awarded the Canadian Diamond Jubilee Medal. 19th of July 1929, Lawrence Hugh Montgomery, my father, was born. He'd be named Lawrence after Ken's younger brother, and Hugh after Hugh John. A few months later, 29th October 1929, the New York stock market crashed. My dad joked after that, to celebrate his birth, they crashed the stock market. My grandfather got involved in the finance business. The finance business then was not like a bank or a credit union. In the old days, if you wanted a house, you went to a bank. But if you wanted a fridge or a car, banks didn't loan money for that. So you had to go to a finance company. So that's who got into that business. 1932, Norman Montgomery of Bedeque passed away. His farm was go to his son Archibald, who in 1933 married Mildred Craig. Of interest, Mildred had a brother, Walter Craig. Walter moved to Wetaskiwin to manage the Montgomery Fur Farm, and in time he'd be assisted by his nephew Alf Craig. Walter later returned to Bedeque, and he's buried in the cemetery in Lower Bedeque as well. October 32, Douglas Basil Wright, my uncle, was born, Montgomery. 2 blocks out to where they lived, Joe Loney lived with 2 daughters. One was Margaret, Mary Elizabeth Loney, that became my mother. Ken also continued his interest in sports, specifically football, and he was involved with the original Edmonton Eskimos back in 1938-9, where he's the founder and the secretary. The Eskimos then shut down because of World War II. On 7th of February 1939, the family were shocked when Frank Montgomery died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 60 years old. He was walking down the street and just dropped. Frank's only son, Jim, had left Wetaskiwin to attend the University of Alberta and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, of course more known as MIT, where he obtained an engineering degree. And it's reported that Jim, like Ken, had intended to build his future somewhere other than Wetaskiwin. However, with the untimely death of his father, he had no choice but to come back, take over his father's interests in the store and the Fox Ranch. The family is still grieving when, 1st of September, the Germans invaded Poland. Jim would put his 2 younger sisters through university, would both attend the University of Alberta. His sister Marjorie obtained a law degree. In 1940, married another lawyer, Wilbur Balker. Wilbur Balker becoming a long-time and very well-respected dean of law at the University of Alberta. And there's a building right near the Alberta legislature named after him. 1966, Marjorie became the first, and don't forget, Marjorie was born in Bedeque. 1966, Marjorie became the first female judge appointed Alberta's juvenile court. And she and Wilbur were both recognized for various achievements, including both being awarded the Order of Canada in 1990. Younger sister Dorothy earned a Bachelor of Commerce degree and married a Leonard Buzzard, who's a U of A graduate, who was another engineer. In June 1941, Ken, my grandfather, a little older, 33, decided to enlist and signed up with the Edmonton Fusiliers. Starting out as a private, as a corporal by July 1941. He was then fast-tracked and sent up to Gordon Head, BC to take the officer training course. In October 41, was commissioned as a lieutenant, or lieutenant, I should say. Then stationed at Port Alberta in Terrace, BC, where he was involved with training soldiers. On 24 April 1942, Lucy Maud Montgomery died at the age of 67 in Toronto. Her husband, Reverend Hugh and McDonald, died a year later, 16 December 1943. October 42, Grandpa was promoted to captain. Don't forget, age 33 in the war, that's pretty old. Most of these guys are 18, 20-something years old joining, so he was the old man joining. 13th of January, Jim Montgomery married Irene Ellison in Wetaskiwin. 1944, Hugh John sold out his interest in the family store to Jim, who then renamed it Montgomerys Limited. Like many soldiers, Ken wanted to go to overseas, but my grandmother didn't want to have nothing to do with that, and she was less than happy when she learned he was going. He served overseas in Germany and Holland, acting as a liaison officer between the Americans, British, and Canadians. There's many inquiries made to determine if Ken was connected or otherwise related to Field Marshal Montgomery. I don't know how he responded to that. He was asked all the time. He was honorary discharged at the end of the war. Adelaide died in 1952. She was an accomplished musician. In 1905, she was the Alberta opera champion. Very good on piano. She taught my dad how to play piano, my uncle how to play piano. So she died in 1952. She was buried with Lawrence in the family plot. Hugh John Tenney didn't leave Wetaskiwin. He'd lived there too long. He wanted to just remain with his friends. He stayed active with the fur ranch right to the end. Also in 52, my grandfather was elected as president of the Eskimos and was also the president in 1954 when the Eskimos as underdogs went to the Toronto Grey Cup and won their first Grey Cup. While Ken was busy with Sterling Finance the Eskimos, he was involved also with the family fur farm. 1954-55 was president of the Canadian Mink Breeders Association. They're just in the process of getting rid of the fox, because fox just wasn't popular anymore and switching to mink. My grandmother Evelyn wasn't idle herself. She'd been very involved as a Liberal, as indicated before, and in the behind-the-scenes things of politics. She also managed successful election campaigns for Edmonton members of Parliament who went on to serve as ministers in separate Liberal governments. In 1954, Evelyn was appointed as one of Canada's delegates to the United Nations. For that purpose, she was spending 1 year at the UN headquarters in New York. She was not only one of Canada's 11 delegates, but the first Canadian woman delegate to the United Nations, working with Lester Pearson, who was then the Minister of External Affairs. Hugh John continued to visit his friends. On 31st August 1956, less than 1 year after I was born, he passed away. 1956 was the official year the Montgomery Ranch pelted out fox and then focused solely on mink. Moving on to Dad, he married Margaret Elizabeth Loney in 1953, attended the University of Alberta, finished his education while married. He obtained a Bachelor of Arts in Commerce, worked as an accountant for the federal government of revenue, and then on his own, the city of Edmonton, the Alberta government, where he managed a collection of royalties from oil revenue. My mom was a nurse who worked for the Red Cross, and they flew her up in planes up north to collect blood. They would have 5 boys. I was the oldest. Myself, Bob, Mike, Steve, and Tom, and all of us were born in Edmonton. Dad would later retire to manage Grandpa's affairs. Grandpa wasn't well at the end. When he died, I think he was 76. It was heart and everything. Too much smoking and drinking, I think, during his early days, to be really honest. My Uncle Doug then took over the interest in Sterling Finance. But again, as I indicated, with the finance business, with loans, banks and that wouldn't touch them. But all of a sudden, as time evolved, banks would touch them. You could go to the bank for a car or a fridge. So the days of the finance business were doomed. Uncle Doug then got in the travel business. My 2 youngest brothers are left us. Steve passed in 2003. My youngest brother passed 2 years to the day in 2005. Uncle Doug passed 2012. My father died in 2016. My mother, Marg, is like the ever-ready bunny. She's 95 in October, and other than using a walker occasionally, she remains healthy and sharp as a tack. I have 3 sons, Alex, Mac, and Spencer, and 2 grandsons, Jasper and Rowan. It's my hope it will continue the Montgomery family name. Where I was born in Edmonton, of interest, I used to shoot gophers where West Edmonton Mall now stands. Dating myself. Graduated senior high with a diploma, certificate in commercial art. I worked at the time at the family mink ranch before moving to the city of Edmonton and Edmonton Telephones, where I worked as a cableman's assistant. In 1976, I transferred to the Edmonton City Police and became a career as a police officer. I married Christine Zadeb, originally from St. Catharines, Ontario, and she's the mother of my 3 boys. We divorced in 1995. I remarried Brenda Johnstone, originally from Regina, Saskatchewan. For our honeymoon in 1995, we came to PI for the Clan Montgomery big gala thing is here, and some of the Montgomerys who were present were there. My father, Dad, Lawrence also came with me. My wife still bugs me, how come we had to bring your dad on our honeymoon? Because he'd never been to the island, he wanted to come too. He figured, well, might as well all go together. So after 25 years service, I retired as a detective in January 2000. We then moved to Medicine Hat, a small city of about 50,000, kinder, gentler situation, which is very close to the Saskatchewan and Montana borders. We have the most days of plus 39 straight days. Oh, you just love that. I don't. Here we established a paralegal. I don't know if you can do it here, but in Alberta it's legal to, you don't have to be a lawyer to do wills and estate things and then traffic ticket defense and that kind of stuff. So I did that for another 25 years. So after 50 years before the courts, I said enough's enough, I'm out of here. And now I can go on and do things I want to do. One of those being to carry on the family history, the genealogical work that Jim Montgomery did, who passed it on to me. We had a lot of discussions. His kids weren't that interested. He said, Ken, I hope you'll take this on. And I did. And the chart here, the local Montgomerys have. I've got mine here that I brought. But this only goes up to 1972. So there's a lot of births, dash, and a lot of blanks that can be filled in. And that's what I'm working on now. And of course, with the different sites that you can go on to for genealogical research and that, it's not that tough. Once you lock in with your family line, sometimes like with my heritage, you go boom, and it'll just zoom you into 10 different family lines and it completes it. So it's an interesting thing. Again, I'm very, very glad. I learned so much coming here this time. You know how tough it was for the longest time. I was trying to figure out what the difference between Lower Bedeque and Bedeque was because they're side by side. No, they're not, right? Well, I had to find that out myself getting here. But I've gotten a lot of information on family members, why this farm turned over, when, how, who's got it now. So I'm still putting a bunch of information together, and hopefully with a bunch of keeners in the crowd here, we can get something done. So other than that, tomorrow I am back to Medicine Hat via Calgary. And also too, I note my good friend in the back is the president of the Abogweet United Empire Loyalists, which I'm a proud member of. So if anybody wants any information on Loyalist information or how to join, you can either do it online or we'd be glad to have a chat with you after the meeting. So other than that, is there any questions? I know I threw a lot at you. It's kind of, I didn't want to bombard you, but just when you start, it's hard to finish.
You mentioned early on that two of the Montgomerys came on the Annabella.
Right.
So, and you mentioned that evidence for that is a gravestone, right? Inscription on a gravestone?
No, just in part. The main evidence is the ship's log for the Edinburgh, the ship
Yes.
Edinburgh.
Yes.
Hugh Montgomery paid tickets for his wife and children to come over on that ship.
Yes.
So there's a documented record that shows Hugh paid for his wife and 3-4 children, which totals 5 Montgomerys. But with Hugh and Donald, there'll be a total of 7 Montgomerys.
Yeah.
So that would add up to the 7.
So the proposition that Hugh and Donald came on the Annabella, is that sort of by difference? If so, they're not accounted for in the Edinburgh, therefore one can assume that they were on the, I'm sorry, yeah, the Edinburgh. So they were on the other two that were on the Annabella by just kind of deduction, or is there any real evidence?
Partly deduction and partly in the fact they did settle at Fox Point, and they are listed on the official records as just if you look at the, there's a cairn at Malpeque, and it lists the families that came on the Annabella, included the Montgomerys, but it doesn't say who, it just says the Montgomerys.
Yeah.
That kind of evidence. And also, I don't think we ever found Hugh Montgomery's tombstone. I think they might have just buried him in the back or done something. I was up at Malpeque today trying to figure out, they're having a hard time with the records. If you walk tombstone to tombstone, you could be there an awful long time. But I know Helen's in there, and there is a definite reference to her being on the ship on 1771, and her husband being on the Annabella.
Yeah, Helen married to Donald Ramsey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm descended from that couple.
Oh, okay, good.
And yes, her gravestone does indicate that they came on in 1771.
Right.
Which applies to Edinburgh. But I don't know, I'm not aware of any primary evidence indicating that there were any Montgomerys on the Annabella. And the monument that's in the park, Cabot Park, is not reliable in terms of the names that are on it. There are other names.
A lot of monuments are in error, I agree. But the one interesting thing is, I think it was Stuart, the guy in the big court battle with the Annabella after it crashed. He was from Campbelltown in Argyllshire. Campbelltown is a not stone throw, but it's close to Mulligan Tire,
I've been there.
where the Montgomerys were from. And I'm guessing that he lined up, hey, let's get on the boat, boys, and I'll help you get over. Plus, they landed at Fox Point. That was all people from the Annabella that mainly settled in that area. So some of the records still aren't found or maybe lost. But as of now, that's what I'm going to stick with. But again, as I indicated at the beginning, I can always be proven wrong. And before, they had everybody on the Annabella. But we know for sure with the ship's records that the rest of them weren't on there.
Yeah, my take is, well, I haven't seen any real evidence that the Montgomerys on the Annabella.
Okay, not fair. Anything else? Oh,
Do you know what year John Montgomery came to Lower Bedeque? It's about 1800, is it? Or
well, it would
what's
have
the year
to
of
be.
his marriage?
I'm gonna go with my check. So he marries Ann Hooper. He's born in 1766. He dies in 1835. So he's got to establish a farm. You're not going to do that when you got 1 foot in the grave. You're going to be a younger man, I would think, to do that. And then, of course, Ann's father gave him the land to build on.
Is there any marriage record or a marriage?
No, we're still
Yeah.
looking for that.
Yeah, and no land, deed records.
No, still looking for land deeds, land transfers. Also, I wonder, can you imagine if you lived in Malpeque in those days, how do you get to meet a girl from Bedeque?
I was wondering that.
You know, because I mean, you just didn't pick up the phone or go, there was no internet dating going on back then.
One possibility is that when Reverend Keir came to be the Presbyterian minister in Malpeque, the congregation in Malpeque was joined to the congregation of Bedeque.
Okay, no, that's probably a good link.
Yeah.
That's probably a good link.
Helen Montgomery, Lucy Maud Montgomery, wrote a story called Pioneer Wooing, and we featured in the school there. And it was a family story that had passed down in her family from the Montgomerys, and she wrote it up as a fictional story, changing the names. And she featured it 3 times in her writing. She wrote it in the Farm magazine as 1903. As a story, then it's in The Story Girl, which is a novel, and it's also in An Alpine Path. And in it, it involves 2 of her great-grandparents, but one is David Murray in Bedeque, and the other is Hugh Montgomery in Malpeque, both of them friends with each other, young men, and David Murray decided he was going to ask one of the Penman girls, and I think it was Nancy Penman. They lived at Penman's Point up in Fort Hill. He was going to ask her to marry him, but he made a mistake. He went up from Bedeque, and he lived in North Bedeque. And there might be a rudimentary road there, and he stopped in to tell his friend Donald that he was going to propose to this girl. Donald, the story goes, fed him lots of drink. And it was March, they could go across the ice. David fell asleep. Donald raced across the ice to Fort Hill, taking the shortcut, proposed, and was accepted.
That sounds like something Montgomery.
Yeah. When David woke up the next morning, there was no Donald. And he had an ox cart, so the story goes, whereas Donald had a horse. But when he got across the bay on the ice, they were gone. But there was Betsy Penman, and she said, "Will you take me?" And he said, "Yes." So they both married 2 sisters. And the proof of that is about 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, Catherine Strong Collins, who's a researcher of Ellen Montgomery's history, went to the archives in Charlottetown, and there was a marriage license of David Murray for, first of all, Anne. First, I forget whether Betsy or Nancy was his choice, but there's a marriage certificate. He paid 10 shillings for it, and it's dated March 1788, I think. And also, a year later, there's another marriage certificate, David Murray, this time with the other sister. So it's a true story. It's in the in the archival records, and that had passed down. Both of those individuals were great-grandfathers of Ellen Montgomery, and because their children intermarried in the next generation. Anne Murray, her grandmother, married Hugh, the man who became a senator, Hugh. And so this was passed down in the family, but it's quite a story.
So the true story is that they married a year apart.
Yes, he got the license a year apart. Yes.
Yeah.
They didn't get married at the same time, but they're both David Murray to the 2 sisters. And I always wondered, did he get a refund on his 10 shillings? Which would be a lot of money. That's half a pound. A lot of money in 1788.
The one thing I'm having a tough time finding is some of the early photographs, and I see we brought one here tonight. This classic example of families getting nice pictures like that. It's like my dad used to show me pictures like this when I was a kid, and Dad dies. Who's who? Nobody wrote a name on the back. And now can you imagine with the phone thing?
Yeah.
when I go, my kids are not gonna have a clue what I got on there for phone. But I'm trying to get as many things, especially the old homes and stuff like that. I know, John, you're trying to get some of the old Italy pictures. And so we'll see what we can do on that. So if anybody wants or can after the presentation, you want to get my email or my number to text me or something. If you get any info or anything on something that might help or confirm marriage records and stuff like that, that would be great. Because I'm trying to finalize this thing. And I'll be putting most of my stuff on myheritage.com or whatever. And anybody can link on there. You'll be amazed what information you get for nothing.
What's that house we've been saying on the screen all night?
That's the original Montgomery house at Fox Point. And I say, me and Brett we got a chance. I've seen it from the outside before, back in '95. Matter of fact, I had a picture of it I sent to June Ellis, a really good artist in Northwest PI, who did me an oil painting of it. But we got there just as these guys were going home. They just vacation here and we go back stateside. So we got a tour of the inside now. That was the original house, but it was built like 4 sections. So they built this and then built another thing and then eventually put the upstairs. And that's where they had the 17 kids. And that's what it didn't look like that when they had the 17 kids. It was like a, take 3/4 of that off. So it's still there. But I'm fearful again of the erosion of the shore. Maybe another 30 years or something. Because they got no land behind them to pull it back. It'll be gone. So that's where any Montgomery on the island, that's the starting point. Worth a trip up. If they're there, they'll give you a tour, but if nothing else, just to touch the house. I got a good thing of dirt from the ground out front. Little stuff like that.
I think there was also stories that Montgomery used to go to visit there at Fox Point, the Montgomerys. Because my grandmother was from Malpeque, and she would remember her going to the Presbyterian Church in Malpeque, Montgomery.
Oh, it's all the information's out there. We just gotta start tying it together, because you know something, I know something, we just gotta start sharing some information.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, a lot of history, especially the history that ties to the Bedeque branch.
Those pictures are of the barns at Lower Bedeque that I took.
Lower Bedeque, yeah.
Yeah,
You recognize it.
Yeah, I took those pictures in 2009, I think. And I think the barns were pulled down shortly after that. And I was in the house at the time, the house that our friends at the back, and the upper floor had still its original early doors, the Lower Bedeque house, doors. The house at Malpeque was moved in 2017, and some changes were made at that time, I guess. I haven't seen it since.
Yeah. Really nice guys. I said they put a lot of money into moving the house back and putting iron beams to support the foundations and stuff. Matter of fact, he was kind enough for me and Brett. He took us up in the attic to show the hand hewing wood for the beams and everything. And he said, well, here, he gets a pair of pliers, and he took out 2 of the old hand forged, square-ended nails. We just got a nail. That's the most exciting souvenir I think I got in the island.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, like I say, if anybody has wants to swap numbers or emails or something, please get a hold of me before you go, because this is the opportunity to do so. If I got any other information I can pass on to you later, I'd be glad to do so. Other than that, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken, and in appreciation.
Please tell me this is a gift certificate for a lobster roll.
I'll take it again.
I just want to, apart from thanking Ken, which I've done, I just want to mention next week's talk is by Heather Harris, who is our museum operations manager, and Heather is at the back. She's been managing the camera. This talk, like all of the others, will be on YouTube within a few days, if you want to see it again, and it was packed with information, and I'm sure even for Montgomery, some of you will have got a little lost in the many mentions of the different generations. So you can go back and listen again, and even take notes if you want. And all the other talks of the season are on it. Heather's talk is on the life and legacy of William Critchlow Harris, the renowned island architect who has left us many church buildings, including the church in Kincora, Indian River, and Tryon in this area, and many elsewhere, including houses. And Heather has made a special subject of this in previous employment, and it will be a visual presentation of a lot of his work, so it should be very interesting. That's next Monday, the 31st of August at 7 p.m.